Ina e ke kamali I ki lele na uhana e ko e ke ki ho e lono e wa ulai. So we're in conversation with Auntie Ayai, Kumu Ayai Bello, and just kind of reflecting on the series of videos that we've done so far, just in conversation about Mauliola and the impact of COVID-19 in kind of bringing our awareness very, very acutely on the way that we care for ourselves, the way that we care for other people, and how to kind of get our priorities straight in a whole, like the full body holistic context. As fireworks going off, I hope it doesn't, you can't hear it.
That's good.
It'll punctuate our conversations at just the right moments. um but it has been a year. It has been a year, and I guess officially 9 months of lockdown, but it's been quite a while already, and it doesn't seem like there's going to be a whole lot of changes in the next year, as far as lockdown and all these protocols around COVID. So um, just wondering if you have, or what your general sense is of, like, of all of the outreach around how to malama ko palama. How are we um, how are we doing? How are we doing? How are you doing? How
I'm doing really well. Um, I keep listening to people and I hear people saying, "I'm so glad this year is over." Um, it really makes me wonder if we're really looking at the lessons from COVID. I think it was a great year for humanity. There definitely was an increase in awareness, and which is exactly what we need. There was a direction toward the spiritual given to us. There was a direction to Malama, our planet, given to us. Um, and we were, not only that, we were given time to be at home to think about it. Some people with nothing else to do, not even a job to go to. I have never seen the freeway like it was the few times that I did go out early on. And contrary to what a lot of other people think, I believe that this was the most exciting year of my life with respect to humanity, because we're right there on the edge. And it might seem like it's a make it or break it kind of thing, and in a lot of ways it is for humanity, but I have a lot of hope. I know that there is a lot of fear. um but when else in all of history have we been given time to reflect on our actions, individually as well as collectively as mankind, and to understand the impact and the footprint that we have left on this planet? It is a time when our current resources and teaching, the way they are currently set up, um, they don't work too well. And yet the powers that be, they're not willing to truly look out for the good of the people yet. They're still looking for money. They're still promoting scarcity rather than abundance. And we know that abundance exists. Um, Native and indigenous peoples are going back to their teachings. They're going back to their kupuna, and they are getting answers. And yet the middle American society continue along their merry way. Um, on a spiritual level, the the ego is on the way out the door, and it is kicking and struggling and protesting, and it's not going to go out without a fight. And for some people that fight is internal. For other people, like they've already made their decision and taken a side, and are trying to take care of that in their life. So, a lot of what comes down to mauliola, or our overall well-being, is not just, it's not our physical well-being, it's not the scarcity of food or the scarcity of water. Although in some areas of the world, just to access clean water is an issue. But COVID, you know, again, I go back to the same thing, that light is the physical manifestation of truth. And I believe that during 2020, there was a lot of light shown. We began that enlightenment, and it showed us all the things we need to address, all the things we need to look at. And if you've been doing your job and things, then you would have said, yay, look, it showed me I've got this far, and I've done this, and I know what I need to do to stay healthy. I have had to make these changes in my life, but I know it's for the good of everyone, including the planet. Now, if you weren't in the right frame of mind, then you feel you are being attacked by a pandemic, by an uncontrollable virus that has killed so many people and is making our life miserable, because now we are inconvenienced in so many ways. And you might not be ready to look at yourself with a critical eye. You might not know how to be with your children 24/7 and stay sane. And bless those teachers who take your kids every day during the normal time. So hopefully this will show light on what the teachers actually do for everyone in society. There's so many little cases like that, but overall, we are in the most exciting period of time, and there are things that are reflective of that. This current Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, those are outer planets, which means the impact that it has is long lasting. It's not like a little transit between Mercury and Venus, the closer planets. The farther away they are, then the longer time we feel its impact. And the more the impact is on a holistic nature, rather on just the nitty gritty earthly physical human life, if that makes any sense. And so this conjunction is part of it, symbolizes the getting rid of the divisiveness of the world that we've lived in for the past 1,000 years, where we point fingers, we blame. Somebody has to take the blame, even when things happen spontaneously, but yet the blame has to be placed. And we're being told we need to shift out of that. And I do believe that the shifts that are happening as a result of this, they are on an individual basis. These changes are inside out grassroots changes and movements. It's not going to work as a top down from anybody, because COVID doesn't discriminate. COVID does not sustain the society where the leaders and the money is top heavy and everybody else just kind of does what they can to survive. So because COVID does not support that, that's why they cannot figure out how to get rid of COVID, because none of their traditional methods work. Yeah, because they have never come across something like this. Because when you stop and you think about it, the viruses are always there, but they seem to come more acute, and when there is an imbalance in nature, in their living environment, in our living environment. So clearly there's an imbalance. And until we start addressing those things, which a lot of it has to do with the environment. Um, COVID is not just going to disappear. And, we're just getting started. They might think that the vaccine is the beginning of the end, but we're getting started. We just had beautiful winter solstice. And just as we ended ceremony, boom, Tutu Pele arrived. Now, if that's not significant as to the explosive nature, we have to remember that this conjunction takes place in Aquarius too. And Aquarius traditionally is ruled by Uranus. And Uranus is infamous for the unexpected, explosive, drop out of the sky kind of things that shock everybody. Yeah. So you want to know what's happening in 2021? Those kinds of things. But the saving grace is that the opposite sign, Leo, rules leadership and government. And Leo is a natural ruler. So all over the world, there are going to be, I guess you could say, popular leaders that spring up among the people that will be doing their job in organizing and helping, without really calling themselves attention to themselves, or even necessarily engaging in the existing governments. But these movements are out there and those people are out there. And throughout the year, we're going to begin to see them. And yet they won't be calling attention to themselves. They will be calling attention to their fight, to their struggle, to the issues that they're dealing with. And they will bring people together. They will bring people together. And the powers that be, and I don't know how else to address them because there's so many, there is abundance in the world. Let me repeat that one more time. There is abundance in the world, and yet they are still trying to have us believe in scarcity. Well, there's not enough vaccines for everybody, so sorry, you're not in the category to receive it. We're still playing those games. And until we can get off of that, COVID is going to hang around too. And it's going to be where we start to see it as a natural part of our life. But the thing is, how we respond to that and the changes we make to our individual attitudes. We're having these incredible opportunities to expand our awareness, to include the invisible realms, the spiritual realms. Our physicality in our life is such a small part. And yet the way that we have been educated and indoctrinated and colonized to believe that it is everything. It is not everything. Our attitude towards death will have to definitely change. It is not the boo-hoo-hoo. Basically, everyone's gonna die, and it's just a matter of when. And it is not correct that now that we have technology to assume that everybody should live to the ripe old age of 89, 90. People will die when it's time for them to die, and it's because they have served their purpose and it's time to move on. They have finished their learning and the teaching that they came to do. And I think that's one of the hardest things even about COVID, is because people's attitude toward death. Because bottom line is, if it's not your time to go, COVID or no COVID, you're not going to go. And that has been shown throughout history. Anytime there has been a pandemic, the plague, why do those who survive? It's not because they necessarily took the vaccine, if there was one. And then, then you have the plague in the Mediterranean and all the countries that eat garlic. Oh, well, they didn't get hit as hard as the other one. So is the answer the garlic? No, but the answer might be a little bit about their lifestyle. So things are going to get intense. When you have a conjunction, you have a coming together of energy. And so that's going to be a lot of energies, and they're going to be energies that seemingly, and again, seemingly oppose each other. One is trying to expand, the other one is trying to control and contract. So Jupiter is the expansion, it's the growth, it's the abundance, it's the increase, the augmentation by exponential growth. And then Saturn, the rings of Saturn are the enigma. The rings are like prison bars. They can keep you safe, or you can feel imprisoned by them. So if you feel imprisoned by them, then all your energy is to struggling to try to get out of it. But if they're protecting you, then you have time to reflect and meditate and go inwardly and think of what you're going to do. So, this conjunction, I mean, it was so obvious in the sky. You could be looking around sunset and, the sky is still light and there's absolutely nothing there. And then you blink your eyes in a second, and exactly where you were looking, there's this brightest little star that you could ever imagine. And it's all about timing. It was always there. And yet until the very moment of dusk and whenever the time, then all of a sudden appeared. That again is a reflection of things that are going to happen in 2021. There are going to be appearances of natural leaders. There are going to be very unique natural phenomena in nature that happens. There may be things that haven't happened for a long time. But the biggest thing is going to be the internal transformation and the internal reckoning and reconciling of those energies within each individual. Yeah. Even on the larger scene, on the political scene, on the social scene, those underlying movements, those underlying currents are slowly gathering and pulling energy together. It is a time of unity. And so those energies are coming together. Does that kind of give you some idea?
Because I feel like I feel like it's resonating with that, like that conversation that I mentioned to you before we started of like, you know, really getting serious about our our path, our work, our value, and what we're gonna do with that. And I feel like all the stuff that you're talking about, like this kind of dichotomy of like the need to control for outcomes, the need to control the pandemic, the need to control, um, the massive death that's happening, and then also like this need to have wisdom and discernment about what it is that we're actually trying to accomplish. Because I feel like that in and of itself is kind of, I mean, it's just bringing, I mean, people have talked about this, all year. Like it's all of this has done is highlight in the most unmistakable ways, if it was ever mistakable before this, in the most unmistakable ways, that the way that the structures that we are imprisoned by, I mean, speaking of imprisonment versus versus creating a safe space to reflect, like we're imprisoned by these structures that are creating so much injustice in the world, so much unnecessary suffering and death. And are we going to get serious about our power to do something about it, in our personal lives, in our communities? Like this idea of like the age of Aquarius and like this conjunction about expansion and contraction and like and potentiality versus like the bare bones, like how is that actually gonna, what are the structures that are actually gonna facilitate something happening that you want to happen? Like figuring out a way to harmonize the potentiality with the practicality, like that is the huge work that we're doing. This is the huge work of like restructuring our relationship to power, like our personal power and our collective power, political power, all of these things, like how are they aligning? And I just feel that so so strongly at a personal level. And like, why is it such a struggle? Like, why is it such a struggle? Like, like, why do we
Because
struggle
it
with that?
seems so logical and it seems so natural. It's like, why can't people just do what they're supposed to? There is a huge shift happening in energy and power. And it is happening on such deep levels that people aren't really aware of it. And the powers that be aren't aware of it because they haven't been able to put their finger on it because they don't know what it is. Um, and along with us, that shift in power, we are going to be empowered to do things. And it will be our awareness and our determination that empower us to change things. But as we are empowered, that comes with a great kuleana. And we have to awamo, we have to accept and embrace that responsibility and act on it. And it's so true what you're saying. So how are we going to know? How are we going to know? Bottom line is, why are we here on earth? Where is humanity headed? Humanity is headed to be reborn into unity. So in other words, all the existing things that are divisive have to turn into unifying factors. And they're not necessarily opposing and opposite factors. That is what the powers that be would have us believe. Well, you can't have the two things at the same time. And yet we have to have the two things at the same time, because we have an individual consciousness as well as a collective consciousness. They have to coexist. They have to be the reflection. They have to be the microcosmos and the macrocosmos. And we need to have an awareness, a working understanding, a working definition of those things. And every individual has to start working toward that and understanding that. It is our kuleana, it's nobody else's kuleana. And one of the biggest things that come into play is our relationship to our planet. Because that's where there has been a lot of damage. But just like people who may have terminally ill or very serious ailments, and you hear about these miraculous healings because of what the body is able to do. We can see in just the shortest time what has happened to our environment, to the oceans, just to the forest, to the parks. I was at the beach the other day with my son, and he bought this snorkeling thing. He goes, "Mom, I have never seen so many fish." And I know you can always fish off of mokuleia. There are still people that live off of that, but for the fish to be there so abundantly and to be staring at the people who do go into the water, it's kind of like, who is this strange child with a snorkeling gear on his face, and they're looking at him and he's like, mom, there's so much fish, and if you think about that, 9 months, can you imagine if we really truly began to take our stewardship of the planet seriously? So I know people they want to know the overall, but they also want to know what's going to happen on personal levels. Personal levels, they're going to be a lot of deep healing that is going to continue, and it's going to be so deep, and the emotions are going to be so intense. It's going to be a little bit spooky, and people are going to be afraid. And this is where we need to act. We cannot allow the fear to overtake us. We cannot go and look at the news and look around us and then just sit there in fear. We have to be proactive. And the way to get rid of fear, the only way to get rid of fear, is through trust. We have to trust and know that we are on this trajectory, that we are on this path to be reborn into unity. So, you talked about giving birth. There are rare cases where there is no physical pain involved in birth, but that's not the norm. And so we will go through our pains. Society will go through our pains. Individuals, individual families, communities will go through their pain. But if they allow baby to be born, then they can rejoice once baby is out. But if we are fighting and resisting, we don't want to be in labor for a week. We want to bring baby forth, you know. And so I was just thinking, because I teach chanting, right? And how do you get the ee in your voice? How do you get the kuolo in your voice? And it is because we are pushing air and restraining at the same time. And when we find just the right spot, we find our chant voice. That place that's resisting as well as pushing out at the same time. And what do you know about that, Emily? Some people, they can do it naturally and they just open their mouth and they just do it. But there are others that you try and you try again and you hunt a hole and oh, it got better. And then the next day it's back to what it was. And you hunt a hole and hunt a hole and hunt a hole. So that's what this year is going to be like. Political wise, we're going to see things go up and down in like the state and the local governments and things. People are actually going to be fearful of accepting those positions of responsibility, because it's like, where if you realize the system is broken, then what are you doing stepping? You're going to step into this huge entanglement. But if you know that there is an outcome, and if you are brave enough to do what is pono, to do what is right, instead of doing things only for the interest of money, things will start to change. Already things have. I think that our communities in Hawaii, in so many ways, we have shown how resilient we are and how resourceful we are during COVID, taking into consideration again that we are in this island. We are probably making the best use of our little garden space and our lands. Everybody was growing things this year, cultivating things. And what it did show us is that we don't have to be totally reliant on the shipping industry for every single thing we have. And we look back to what did our kupuna do? And if we were really serious, we would all be planting coconut trees. Because should there be a shortage of water, there is your water source. And, we need to revisit the things that our kupuna have laid out for us, the things that they have taught us, with a very critical eye, with a very accepting attitude. And also to really use our innovation and creativity to see how we can apply that to our modern life. Right now I'm in the middle of this, trying to make this film about kapa. And part of the message is that, this is a traditional practice, and yet it is just as valid today in the 21st century as it was back in the day. And where is the abundance? We need to look at where the abundance is. The abundance is that I have a mala that put out over 100 mature trees to make kapa so we can take care of our iwi kupuna. And that is our kuleana. And personally, that I would like to help make sure that our supply meets the demand. And so there are EV that are just sitting there without having been cared for. So, we all need to see what kind of goals we're going to set. We need to have a little bit more patience. So if we haven't learned that throughout this past 9 months, well, we're still going to find ourselves irritated and in situations where we have to have more patience. Yeah. We need to be a little bit more kinder in considering other people and not just ourselves, in reaching out just a little bit farther. See, that's the good thing. Now that we're moving away from divisiveness, everything is connected. And so that's like a can of worms too, because everybody's like, well, you can't do this without worrying about that. And that's true. And that's why there is that coming together that needs to happen. Even in our lives, if we find we can't do this and we can't do that, we're going to have to come to some kind of place where we can not just live with it and be and still feel like we got ripped off, but to truly understand that it's okay like this. And that's hard. That's hard because when you're still irritated because you got to wait in line or you got to wear a mask, if those kind of things that are so minor still irritate you and you can't comply with it and you can't do it, then the things coming up in 2021, you're not going to be able to handle either.
And I feel like that's also, I mean, it just comes back to what you were saying before about like, it's the process of birth. Like we're rebirthing ourselves. We're rebirthing the way that we do things, restructuring everything, literally everything. And when you're in labor, when a person is in labor, like resisting the process is going to make it 10 times harder. And so if we're in a position where we're trying to control and complain why we got to wear a mask, well, like this is how you labor. This is how you labor for, for something better. This is how we labor in a way that like we're basically here for each other in the middle of a pandemic. Like this is how we stand, like how a Pele would stand, or Pele Kiki would stand, like in protection of the birthing person. Like we're all supposed to be holding space for each other in that way and protecting ourselves, protecting one another in this way. Like if we're complaining about it and we're resisting it, it's going to make it so much harder. And I feel like that that focus on how we can expand within these limitations, like how we can reimagine what is possible for ourselves and for the world, for our governments, for all of these structures. Like we learned real quick, like when the governments have been saying forever that, oh, well, we can't give money here, we don't have budget for that, and all of these things. And then all of a sudden everybody got $1,200, didn't they? That was real easy. Right? Like all of these things that, like, PPE for hospitals and all of this extra stuff that somehow there's never any money or resources for. It's not a shortage. It's like how you said, there's abundance in the world. The problem is not scarcity. That's a false framing of what's going on. Like if we are in a position to reimagine what is possible for ourselves and for each other, we got to take our power back in that sense. Like that is the calling, in my opinion.
We have to be creative because we have been so trained to believe it only works in this one way. There are as many ways to do things as there are people. And for those who are willing to try and experiment and give it a shot, they will be way more successful than those who aren't. Like we just had Christmas. I don't see anybody dying because there's supposedly a lack of money or the stores had shorter hours or there was I haven't heard those stories. Have you? you know? And a lot of people have said, yeah, we just had a simple Christmas. It was really nice. Yeah, sometimes less is more, you know? And we're reevaluating. We need to reevaluate and look at our values and what is really important. What do we really want? And again, what is our purpose here? And humanity needs to grow. Humanity is on the brink, but it needs to grow. It needs to be in a space where it will be inclusive of all of the invisible worlds, all of the intangible things that are slowly making their presence known in our lives. And one really good example is like, I do readings, and so a lot of people, the whole psychic world is like, woo. And, you know, I've had a lot of work because people don't know where else to turn. So you're turning to these intangible things. And when it helps you, it becomes real. And the more these intangible things become real to us, then we actually have created a space for it in our life. And once we do that, that means we can tap into that. I mean, I could take off in so many different directions from this conversation right now, but insofar as 2021, we are in the process of doing that. We are in the process of expanding our palama, of expanding our consciousness to include things that previously weren't acceptable to us, or if we even acknowledged its existence, we definitely did not embrace it. And we need to embrace these things because those are the only things that will allow us to see beyond into the future, that will give us an optimistic, positive outlook. We should have hope. Why wouldn't we have hope? If you look at everything that has happened with man during the age of reason and all of the mistakes and all of the things that have happened, we should have hope. We should have a lot of hope because people are realizing, when you realize your error and you try to readjust and refix, isn't that a hopeful situation? That it's not going to happen again, or that we know better now. And sometimes we don't know all the answers, but we don't need to know all the answers. We just need to know that we're headed in this direction. This is pono and this is not. So can we just please stop doing things that are not pono? It's kind of like you always ask the question, Emily. It's like, why can't, what is so hard about them just doing what they're supposed to do? And it's the ego, and the ego is going down, kicking and fighting, you know? And even the people who we see that happening to, we need to find compassion. We need to find compassion for the most unpopular politicians around. We need to be so strong in ourselves that we create the current in society. We create the flow of the abundance in the world, and that they will find themselves helpless against the force of the current. So these are all images. So and I'm speaking in so many ways in so general terms, but do you have any more specific things you want to ask? I mean,
So I was actually, so you can't see, I'm off screen, but I've got my tarot cards. And I feel like this actually might be a good place to close this part of the conversation, because these cards popped out, and it's the star card, which is, can you see? Star card. I mean, this is the card of Aquarius. Speaking of the age of Aquarius, this is what you've been talking about, is like, there is like hope and trust and the fulfillment of these larger goals that we have for ourselves, for the future that we want to bring into fruition. Like, it's here. Like, this is the representation of that guidance and that inspiration and that, like, that harmonizing that we're trying to cultivate in this really exciting but also desperate for a lot of people time. And then also the emperor, but he's in reverse. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I'm like, this is hope for the fall of the empire. Like, you know, this is our hope. Like we're like literally, I mean, it's funny, but it's also like, you know, the domineering, the abuse of power, like the rigidity and the inflexibility that we've been suffering under, and like that this pandemic has brought to like has brought to light, as many other things leading up into this half. Um but this imbalance is not sustainable, and we have hope and power and like the fulfillment, like what our ancestors have passed down to us. Like that is our way out of this. That is our way to set this structure right, so that
It's
this,
Huliya. That emperor is
yes,
Huliya.
you know. So this is what we have, like this is what we have to work with. Like I mean, and this is why I love why I fall in love with with tarot cards as a just as a tool to like give us some focus and some archetypes to understand what's really happening and what we have at our disposal and what we need to bring into consciousness a little bit more in these moments where we're struggling. Because I mean, just to kind of, you know, to bring it around full circle and make it, you know, tangible, because you know, we can go on forever about all things, but like at a practical level, like how are we preparing ourselves to do this work? Like how are we preparing ourselves, ooh, grab an extra card, how are we preparing ourselves to do this work, to be like, because we're not messing around. Like I mean, everybody, we're all saying it in some form or another, but we're not playing around. Like this is serious. This is about legacy. This is about stepping into our collective power and doing what needs doing. Like the power of necessity. Like here we are, you know, it's literally life and death out here for all of us. Like
Yeah,
how are
and
we
you
gonna,
know, it is our collective power, but our kuleana is what we bring to that
mm-hmm.
collective power. You know,
Yeah,
let it not be mistaken that it's just a collective power. There is so much responsibility that goes along with that, and in itself, it's clear in that, you know, of where we put our values and what our ultimate goal is. And the self is important, but the ego is too much already. We need to malama ourselves. We need to be so that we can be a contributing member of the collective. And in order to do that, that requires effort on our part. That requires constant effort from the moment we wake up in the morning to when we go to bed. And it is that mindfulness that is going to allow us to embrace the collective. And it's not always easy. And especially because we have been so brainwashed. You know, now maybe what, couple years back, 10 years back, when I started to understand the process of decolonization, you know, there isn't a single thing or important decision that I make where I'm not trying to really assess, is that really what I'm dealing with? Or is this just a result of the colonization? And so as I try to decolonize, a lot of things, it's like, oh, no, we're not even going to waste any energy on that. Yeah. Because we only have so much energy. And, you know, these have been stressful times. I'm not going to say that it's not. But where are we looking? Am I going to look at this and dwell on all the negative stuff? Or am I going to look at this as the opportunity of all times for humanity to take a step forward? And, you know, people, well, again, they're going to say, well, what about all the people who are dying? Well, you know, what about all the people who die anyway every day? Death is a part of life. And one of the things that has to begin to shift is our attitude toward death. and our understanding toward death. Because it's going to force us to look at the quality of our life in a different way. You know how they always say, live today as if it was the last day of your life. Live it to the fullest. But by that, we're not talking about the fullest, so go out and drink and get high and take your last trip, right? But we all know what we're talking about. But it's not always that easy to do. And yet it is. It's a decision that we make on our part, and then we have to follow through. So 2021, hang on to your hats. It's going to get intense. You know, we talk about global warming. We know that heat is always a catalyst. And in this sense, it's going to be a catalyst to the change that's coming forth. As people, there is so much hope. There is hope for the younger people, hope for the older people, hope for the middle-aged people. And these babies who are being born right now, they're coming into a time of strife. But within their lifetime, they will see incredible things happen. So that whatever they it might have been marked by with the strife of COVID that they're born into, those things will fall by the wayside. There is going to be an increase. I don't want to call it religion, but an increase in spirituality, definitely. Whereas for some people, it's been yeah, well, I don't do that. I don't, my life, I'm not a religious person. I'm not a spiritual person. That is going to increase because we cannot help but have it increase when we become more aware of our own spirituality, of our soul. We are not just our physical body. There is more to us than that. And yet there is so little that we're really taught about it. There's so little emphasis that we put about, well, so how do you maintain your soul? How, what kind of things do you do to take care of it? And how do you keep it in perspective being in the physical body? And I was just talking to somebody today, and they asked me about uli, because I was so into Haumea, and I'm still into Haumea, but I'm also into uli. So uli is sometimes listed as the sorceress, and but uli also represents restitution. Uli represents the restorative powers. Uli has binding powers. So will push us to the brink of where we don't believe we can take any more spiritually, and will push us into that spiritual mode. And li, another meaning for li is to bind. So uli's job is to help us bind that spiritual and the physical together. And it is that binding force of why we just had equinox, right? Or no, we had Alopolohiwa Kanaloa, and the Moana Nui Akea is the binding force. It's what connects us on all the different moku, on all the different aina. It is that binding, it is that collective force. And so for me, uli is also the counterpart of Kanaloa. And we can go deep with uli. We can delve, and we can go deep. And so there's so many things to take into mind. But it's also important, so ever so important, to breathe. To breathe. If you feel out of it, take the time to breathe. It doesn't cost you anything. And if you want to be rebellious and not breathe, then go for it. You only can do that for so long. But breathing and drinking water, I always will end with that as being that's what we need. What is the advice that I'm going to give you? Advice for 2020: to breathe, because the breathing will keep us in sync with the universal process and transition, with the transformation we're going. The water will help us to do that on a physical level. And we're looking a lot for alignment. You know, the conjunction is a form of alignment. We are needing alignment. We need to align to ourselves. We need to align to our kupuna. We need to align to our different piko. There are going to be planetary alignments of the outer planets that are very meaningful and have long lasting results. You know, so this conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter is not just an astronomical phenomena where, oh my goodness, there's a really bright celestial body in the sky. The impact on us will be that of of finding a balance between those two forces, and that they're not necessarily opposing forces, but complementary forces. So the question is, how do we maintain both of them at the same time and find some kind of balance? And we all know that balance is not a stagnant state of being. A balance is usually a teeter-tottering where it goes back and forth. That's how we maintain balance. You don't maintain balance by standing perfectly still. No. So I think that's about it. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be more things coming to me, but that's why, if you have any other thoughts, Emily, or any other questions.
I feel like that's a good place to close this one. Yeah. I mean, I kind of, we could talk for hours.
Yeah, well, you can
but
stop the recording and we can keep
but we
talking.
can stop the recording. Yeah. But I really appreciate you sharing all of this reflection and yeah, just this time to really think about how we've been doing and how we're preparing for what's to come. Because as much as I think there's a lot of value in kind of going with the flow. We're also all like of people who paid attention and like discerned the seasons and what like we weren't just like kind of going with whatever. Like we're paying attention to like where we're going and how we're doing it and what is our intention. And so moving with intentionality, I feel like, I mean, I'm trying to affirm that over my life, and the things that I'm doing. And so, I mean, I feel really strongly about that. Like, let us go with the flow. Let us bring ease into how we're moving through difficult times, but also let us be discerning, let us be paying attention, let us be makala, all those things. Um, so that, so that our highest intentions are manifesting like through our actions. Um, but yeah, I'm happy to end here and then we can talk some more after.
Okay, well, thank you so much. If you're interested in more on a personal level, then I guess come get a reading or something. There's
Yeah,
already
I'll
lots
link
of
here.
people. Yeah, I'm kind of like, I have lots and lots of people asking for readings right now. But there's time. These kinds of transitions are not overnight transitions. So there's time. There's
Yeah.
time for everybody. But if you breathe and you drink water, it is easier to be able to discern and to create and stand by your intentions. So we can all breathe
Yeah.
and we can all drink water. So maybe we can end with a few breaths. How's that? Shall we
Sounds
just
good.
breathe together? 4 breaths.
Yay. So
Okay. Ahuiho.
we'll see you next time.